Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I go through the current status of my sermon as it is today. And I'm working my way through the book of Daniel. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've had a bruising and brutal, polarized political and religious context to live in. We're often accustomed to those on the right appealing to Christianity in politics, but during the Kavanaugh hearings and all that went on through that, Cory Booker, who many people attributed these sayings as of a man who's looking to run for president in 2020, said that anyone who differed from his position is complicit with evil. This is not a political moment, this is a moral moment. In the moral moment, there are no neutral parties, no bystanders. And he quoted Psalm 23. He didn't name it, and he barely was able to name the Bible in it, but the force and the context of his announcements were clear that he was looking to play a political, a religious, and a moral game. Now, in our polarized context, there are rules for the zero-sum game. Never give an inch, win at all cost, be ruthlessly committed to your own survival, demand and enforce discipline within your tribe, be quick to intimidate or punish anyone who seems to be breaking ranks. Now, recently, Atlantic Magazine looked at a new study, because we all begin to imagine that the country is split right down the middle and everyone is on one side or another, just as both sides often like to imagine. But this study actually demonstrated that 2/3 of Americans constitute what they call the exhausted majority, who find this kind of polarization unproductive, unhealthy, unhelpful, but feel powerless to do anything about it. Now, fighting over politics and religion is not new. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked Rome, and as is often forgotten, the Visigoths were alien Christians, and they were also barbarians. And they marched into Rome, and they sacked the pagan temples, but they respected the Christian churches. But this deeply unnerved a good many people in the Roman Empire, and many pagans blamed Christians for undermining the sacrifices in the temples, because they said that by Christians no longer sacrificing in the temples and paying for the upkeep of the temples, the pagan gods that had protected Rome for centuries lifted their veil of protection, and then the Visigoths were able to come in and sack it. Christians were criticized for having divided loyalties. Jesus was their first Lord, not the emperor, and they were awaiting another life and a resurrection, making them poor citizens of the empire in this life. Augustine, in response to this, wrote a book named The City of God, and it's one of the most important books coming out of antiquity, and he dedicated the books to a friend of his, Marcellinus, who in fact had been a Roman official. He had been a servant of the imperium, and he had been a good man, but at one point he and a friend were falsely accused of betraying the empire, and were executed. Only within a year for the people discover that they had been wrongly executed, that they had not betrayed the empire. But the lives of Augustine and Marcellinus were all within this larger debate about whether you could be a Christian and a good member of the empire. What would it take to be a Christian and a good member of the empire? Now, Marcellinus, before his execution, was having a conversation with a friend, Volusianus, who was a Roman nobleman who was raised pagan, but was considering conversion, but it was wavering on his consideration after the sack of Rome. He was listening to the debate, and so Volusianus brought a number of arguments to Marcellinus about this. He said, this turning the other cheek and going the distance, all these Christian virtues seem counter to what it takes to win. Now, Augustine wrote back to his friend Marcellinus, and he said that he had heard many of these points before. And while he allowed that a lot of Christian morality was not immediately applicable to public affairs, and he argued that Christianity was in fact a better basis for civic virtues that sustained the city then was paganism. And this is a quote from Augustine. It is in this cesspool of evil characters, where the ancient ethos has been abandoned, that the presence and assistance of heavenly authority is most needed. This exhorts us to voluntary poverty, to restraint, to benevolence, justice and peace, true piety and other splendid and powerful virtues. It doesn't do this only for the sake of living this life honorably, or only to provide a peaceful community for the earthly city. It does so also to win everlasting security for the heavenly and divine commonwealth of a people that will live forever. Faith, hope, and charity make us adopted citizens of this city, so that as long as we are on our pilgrimage, if we are unable to reform them, we should tolerate those who want the commonwealth to remain with its vices unpunished. In other words, Augustine is saying, we should be the best citizens of this, even though the empire be corrupt and the vices go in this world unpunished. Now this isn't exceedingly different from the Apostle Paul in the book of Galatians, where he notes that the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience or forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, the Apostle Paul says, against such things there is no law. These virtues remain, but Augustine pressed it further and said, it's actually these virtues that should make Christians the best citizens. In fact, their belief in the city of God versus the city of man, and an inheritance awaiting Christians should in fact give us the liberty to exercise those virtues in ways that many within the secular frame cannot. Ultimately, then, Augustine argued the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, do not disable civic virtue, but in fact they properly enable them. So Christians are not just acceptable citizens, they are the best citizens. The passage succinctly expresses how Augustine imagined morality to relate to politics, an idea developed so much more fully then in the far longer City of God. But then people will often retort back, what if the government or the culture is tyrannical, petty, corrupt, bloodthirsty, impulsive, arbitrary, chaotic, and mindless? Well, do you really think that's the world we're living in? Now, compare the government you live in, or the administration that you're under, with that of Daniel. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar, he had a lot of headaches. There were a lot of battles going on. There was significant military activity, and he was troubled. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses burned into piles of rubble. How's this for a government to work for? But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is no fool. Anybody can make up a story, probably something he would like to hear based on a dream that he tells them. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't get to the top of the heap by being an idiot. He wants to know if they have real power. He wants to know if they have a real connection. He wants to know if they can really see behind the scenes. Once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this was what I firmly decided. When he's telling them he's going to cut them to pieces and burn their houses and destroy their families, he's not kidding. They've seen him do it many times. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, There is no one on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, they love to butter him up, he loves to be buttered up, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among the humans. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and the men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. They weren't even consulted. They were like on the outer ring of this group, and they're going to get a memo. Oh, by the way, the people higher up in the astrology hierarchy have screwed up and messed up the job, and so you and your friends all get to die. When Arioch, also known as the butcher, who was the king's butcher, it's the way it's said in the original language, the commander of the king's guard had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He didn't say, it's not fair, we didn't do this. He asked the king's officers, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Now, compare Nebuchadnezzar, hot-headed, ruthless, bloodthirsty, shrewd in one way. He's not going to be a dupe to the astrologers, but yet demanding and winner take all. And compare Daniel to him. Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So, they're not unreal. They're not looking to be martyrs. They don't want to die. And they're praying fervently and pleading to God for a way out, as anyone who had any God would do. And during the night the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a dream, in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven, and now we have Daniel at worship, and said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and season. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you, and you have made known to us the dream of the king. Now, God could very well have not done this for him, and they very well might have been destroyed. And you get the sense that, Daniel wouldn't have liked it, but he wouldn't have given up belief in his God. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret the dream for him. Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. The king asked Daniel, also named Belteshazzar, again notice the names here, we talked about that last week, Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replied, No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in your bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of the mystery showed you what was going to happen. As for me, the mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, he's a humble man, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind. Now, right away here, you have a question. Well, why would God help Nebuchadnezzar? God shouldn't do that. A righteous God shouldn't do that. He is a tyrant. God should be against him. Remember this zero-sum game and the rules that we have? God doesn't seem to follow our rules. Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. You've heard of feet of clay before? Here it is. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. And the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff in a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the earth. Now, once you know the dream, it doesn't seem real hard to interpret. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you're the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all others. Just as you saw that feet and the toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so it will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so people will be a mixture, and they will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. In those times, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation trustworthy. What will Nebuchadnezzar do? Will he take offense that his golden kingdom won't last forever? Will he kill Daniel as the bearer of bad news? Then Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and offered that an offering and incense be presented to him. This is a Jewish kid. Don't do that. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Notice, now they're using the Babylonian names, administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. Now, this is a story we love. This is a happy ending, and we get the idea that these kinds of things always turn out well. Now, we love this kind of story because Daniel took a risk, God bailed him out, he was rewarded for doing the right thing, and it was happily ever after. What's there not to love? But we also know that more times than not, it doesn't work out this way. That people do the right thing, and they don't receive credit for it, and sometimes they're even punished for it. And what's interesting, and that we shouldn't forget, is that this is a comedy. This has a happy ending, told for a people who had almost complete and uninterrupted tragedy in history. After the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jewish people won't have autonomy. They'll simply be subjects of one empire after another, usually with some brief intermittences in between. How does our political system or our situation compare to that of Daniel? Are our rulers more brutal than Daniel's? Are they more arbitrary? How is Daniel the best servant of a petty, bloodthirsty, egotistical tyrant? Notice how Daniel, even though Nebuchadnezzar is unworthy, Daniel continues to treat him with respect. Does he do it? Pause and edit. Does he do it by compromising his loyalty to the king, who he believes is above it, to the God who he believes is above his king? What does this require of Daniel? Is this a price that we would be willing to face? And right there you begin to see Daniel's integrity, how it's actually because of his integrity that doors open, even though, as we've said before, there very well may not be a happy ending. And the fact that there are so few happy endings to stories like these that makes a story like this stand out so much. Another thing that you might notice as we go through these stories are the risings and fallings of Daniel and his friends. Remember, at the end of chapter 1, Daniel is elevated and he's head and shoulders above the rest of the class. But here in chapter 2, he's of such low status that he's almost forgotten until the butcher shows up to take off his head. And we're going to see this pattern again and again, where at the end of one of these stories, Daniel rises up and he and his friends are promoted, but then they seem to have, between the stories, been demoted and frustrated and gone back to the bottom of the pile. And given what we've seen about the character of the king, this doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing. But is Nebuchadnezzar deserving of Daniel's service, his love, or his loyalty? Why? Where does Daniel's character come from? To whom is Daniel truly loyal? Out of what loyalty do Daniel's virtues flow? And see, this is exactly the point that Augustine makes, that Nebuchadnezzar, we would imagine, would establish a culture in which the servants of Nebuchadnezzar will only give to Nebuchadnezzar what they have to, because Nebuchadnezzar isn't loyal to his people, and so why should they be loyal to Nebuchadnezzar? They only serve him to the degree that it serves themselves. But Daniel is serving a different God, and he has a different standard of integrity, and he has a different thing that orients and drives him. Daniel saves, in fact, the pagan astrologers at the risk of his own life. Who does this sound like? Who saves us at the cost of his life? Now, Daniel stands in alignment to Jesus, and that Daniel holds many of those same virtues. He's humble, he's faithful, he's calm, he's willing to be a sacrifice. But Jesus is contrasted to Daniel, because there's no miraculous deliverance for Jesus from the imperial sword. And Jesus, unlike Daniel, appeared to lose the zero-sum game, which is for most of us, frankly, what we expect. But then, of course, with Jesus, there's the resurrection. Now, all earthly rulers fall short. This we should remember. There are some better and some worse, but they all fall short. They are instituted by God, says the Apostle Paul in Romans 13. But they ought never to be your God or our gods. Properly calibrate your relationship with this fallen, rebellious, and broken world. And in fact, being a Christian in it means to be a contrast, because the way the ladders of this world work are kiss up and kick down, and it's dog eat dog, and those above will only be loyal to those below if it serves them, and vice versa. But as Jesus said, amongst you it should be different. Now, what Augustine notes, and what we see in Augustine, is that this kind of zero-sum mercenary approach leads to a lot of freaking out or sucking up. Unlike contemporary colleagues like St. Jerome, Augustine's relation to the pagan world is calmer, more stable, less prone to melodramatic anathemas or unctuous neediness. Perhaps because of his own pagan upbringing, education, and early adulthood, by the time he came to write The City of God, he knew the pagan world well from the inside out. And in fact, these qualities are exactly what we see in Daniel. He's not freaking out. He's not kissing up. He serves Nebuchadnezzar because he serves his God. And he will be able to distinguish, as we're going to see in subsequent stories, when the conflicts come, and Daniel and his friends will face the consequences for those conflicts when they come too. But this is precisely what the text is there to teach us. But that leads to the question, upon what certainty can you find such composure? Because we see King Nebuchadnezzar angry and furious and threatening to kill all of his servants and burn down all their houses. And we find Daniel with wisdom and tact. Now, I would assert that the only way you're going to find this kind of composure is if, in fact, you believe in the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the God of heaven and earth, and the one who, in fact, was unjustly accused by the empire and crucified by it on our behalf, and yet raised to new life. It's upon that foundation that we can look for the courage to both be the best kind of citizens in this nation, while not also betraying the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.